Hello and welcome everyone to Insight. I'm Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Thank you for joining us.
Today we discuss the place and role of opposition politics in an electoral democracy and how both the government and opposition should ordinarily complement each other to grow credible democratic culture in Nigeria. In essence, we will gauge the quality of opposition politics in Nigeria and why some consider credible opposition in the country a tough order. And then, of course, the conversation will flip over to Elizabeth Omori, who I trust has an interesting conversation lined up. Elizabeth?
Of course, a World Bank development report says Nigeria's 50% population actually lacks digital literacy. So we will be querying some of the facts. We'll look at challenges and benefits for socio-economic development and see if Nigeria can achieve 95% digital literacy before 2030, as stipulated by SDG 4.
Very well then. Let's get things started.
Whatever the issues are,
the National Assembly is constitutionally empowered to scrutinize,
however complex or intricate.
We have involved all the academia, the members of the academia. We have involved the academies.
Be it government policies or in fact any issue of public concern.
Our job is to help you gain clarity and make sense of it all.
This is not really healthy for our democracy.
There's a lot of aggrievance in terms of who has been in power longest and who becomes the governor of the state.
It's also in the quality of food being consumed.
After all, perception is insight.
And gaining understanding is also getting insight.
So I'll begin with the poser. What is the ideal practice with regard to opposition politics generally? I think opposition politics should essentially serve as a reminder of what could be an alternative to the dominant ruling government in terms of ideas and solutions, especially with regards to development issues. And it should also be an ever-present harbinger of leadership change. Well, while these are my thoughts on the matter, let's attempt to expand on that and perhaps create scenarios to buttress key issues as I welcome my guest to the conversation. Dr. Mike Umeri is a chieftain of the People's Democratic Party, PDP, and of course we remember him as the Director General of the National Orientation Agency, NOA, a one-time Director General, of course. And welcome to Insight, Doc.
Thank you so much, Nnamdi.
Nick Agule is a public affairs commentator and public policy analyst, I should say. He currently says he has no political party affiliation, but we know he did some work for the Peter Obi presidential campaign in the last general elections. Nick, I'd like to welcome you so much to the program.
Thank you very much, Nnamdi, and I salute all our viewers globally.
Also, I'd like to welcome our guest. Is joining us via Zoom from the United States. Of course, he's another gentleman, a public policy advocacy and research expert, Dr. Nnemeka Umere. By the way, Dr. Umere is a medical doctor, and he's actively, he actively supported the President Bola Tinubu, in the last general election. And he still does, if I'm not mistaken, because I know he's still a member of the ABAT, that's the APAT diaspora. Thank you so much, Dr. Nnemeka Umere, for joining us all the way from the United States.
Thank you so much for having me. And please let me just correct, just a little correction. It's yes, Umera.
Umera, I beg you, so sorry about that. Umera. Umera means strength of the community, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir, you got it exactly right. Thank you.
Perfect. So I'm
Thank you for having
sorry
me.
about that. Thank you so much for joining us. Gentlemen, I'll just get to it and perhaps lay the foundation for our conversation. Let's maybe begin from, enunciating the key, very essence, I should say, of opposition politics before doubling down on the issue of quality. I think in a more relatable term, or in more relatable terms, major opposition blocs are often expected to ensure that the sitting government does not take any step which might have negative effects on the people of the country. Doc, Dr. Nnemeka Umere, I think I should start with you, seeing that you're joining us all the way from the States. we'll give you as our visitor that honor. I would like to ask if you agree entirely with that analogy that I painted earlier, and whilst mindful that the opposition mostly attempts to check the excesses of the ruling or dominant party, I wonder if in terms of approach, if you think opposition politics must always be totally antagonistic in nature. Otherwise, what other options do they have to register their alternate ideas?
Thank you. So let me start by a brief definition of what opposition should be. Opposition is typically defined as a group or party that is opposed to or constructively criticizes the government or political power or the political party in power. And to that, I'll say that the role of opposition really is to ensure that the government does not take steps which might have negative effects on the people or the country. In other words, the role of opposition should be to check the excesses of the ruling or dominant party, and I have to underline the and here, not to be totally antagonistic. Now, the question becomes, why does opposition matter, especially in our society in Nigeria? Opposition is supposed to be a kind of give and take interaction to help build and strengthen three core values. Number one is to build and strengthen a working constitution. Number two would be to build and strengthen an independent judiciary. And number three would be to build and strengthen a strong legislative branch. When these three issues are strengthened, that brings about good governance and care for all Nigerians. So in summary is that a healthy democracy should recognize how a nation benefits when government reflects a diversity of voices and creates tolerance for dissent.
I mean, takeaways right there, two key issues you raised: healthy democracy, tolerance of opposition or opposing views. Dr. Umeri, would it therefore be right, I mean, having listened to Doug there talk and explain or define opposition politics as it should be, would it therefore be right to say that the quality of opposition could just define, or very well defines, the quality of governance and the nature of democracy in the country? I mean, well, he's defined it. I wonder what your own definition is, and I wonder how the opposition in Nigeria currently defines, themselves. Yeah, but like many, I would expect that they are taking their role in opposition as a very serious, around-the-clock job, and not a part-time or periodic job. I say this because, there's a major issue here, and I think a major part of the problem is that opposition politics is rather than focus on what they should do in terms of providing alternative leadership in terms of ideas, they focus mainly on winning elections and nothing else.
Effectively, the concept of opposition is not just related to politics, but also governance. And that is why in any structure, whether traditional or church or civil society, where people decide, you find those who may not agree with the existing or general concepts that are being propounded. So this provides the alternative views. And sometimes within those views, you find the answer to what you really need to do to solve, the answers to or the solutions you need to issues. So for me, when you tie it to politics or democracy, opposition is a reflection of the reasoning of the people, is the outcome of the choices that people make. So you will find a community of people, or a few states, or voting population going in one direction and a majority in another direction. Now those who are in the majority are said to be the winners, the owners of the processes of government and governance, and those who are outside, who are in the minority, become the opposers. But opposition in what sense? Are they opposing what is right, or just opposing nearly everything that those in charge of authority dispense. No, the purpose of opposition is to keep government in check, to ensure the policies being enunciated and delivered are scrutinized and presented in a manner that they are working, they serve society, and they are in tandem with the design, grand design, national design, or local design, as it were, of delivery of service in terms of achieving the objectives of governance. Now, opposition is not just to criticize. Even if it were to be a tool of criticism, it should be positively so. Negative criticism adds no value. It's just a conversation. If you see people criticizing anyhow, just like they call armchair critics or those who discuss in beer parlors, they just discuss and leave it there. We mean opposition that adds value to the process of governance, one that forces government to listen, that ensures that the structures of governance are beaten in a path or towards the path that is generally agreeable for the delivery of service. They may not be listened to, but at least the point is made. And in this opposition that we see, if it is reduced to political party, for instance, yes, you would expect that in terms of policy, the opposition political party in a democracy should also constitute teams and panels of researchers that will look into the issues that government is propounding and delivering with a view to providing alternative views to enhance the success or outcome and impact of what government is doing to society generally.
Nick, I'm sure you've listened to the two gentlemen. Who've preferred or defined opposition politics as it is in their own thought or what they think. I think you would agree with me, Nick, that citizens in their capacity or political capacity are also instruments of collective deliberations. And when we look at democracy in terms of periodic elections provide that avenue of participation for the citizens as a good or as a public agent. My question to you then revolves around the imperatives for credible elections as a strong point for perhaps institutionalizing democracy. Why is it important for citizens to have that level of conviction that elections provide them an alternative for leadership change, and that they are not excluded from participation either subtly or deliberately by the powers that be?
Thank you very much. Let me just say a word about opposition before I answer the question about election. So opposition, to me, opposition in politics or in a democracy is what competition is in business. So if you see businesses that are highly competitive, it's the consumer that benefits from that competitiveness of the businesses. Like in Nigeria, a good example is telecom, then you have the banks. These are highly competitive businesses. Businesses that there is no competition, like in the power sector, you see the kind of things that are happening there. So it's very important that in politics, opposition is viral, is strong, and is cohesive, because it is one of the ingredients that makes democracy a beautiful system of government. Without a strong opposition, those who are in power are free to do what they would like to do. And opposition, like you rightly said, is not just by the political parties that are not in power. The citizenry, whom I describe as the fourth arm of government, are actually supposed to be in the forefront of opposition. So if you go to countries where the leaders are always watching their back to see what the citizens will say, watching the mood of the citizens before they take any actions, that is the kind of thing that we need. Because that way, the political leaders are perpetually under pressure to ensure that they don't take actions that will put them on the wrong side of the citizens. Now, coming to elections, democracy has its own pillars. Doc from the US already mentioned some of them, which is an independent judiciary, an independent legislature, and a credible election is one of those, just as freedom of speech. Without credible elections. Democracy has failed ab initio. And in Nigeria, you discover that the elections are like war. You know, I see people are going to war. And you find out that during elections, even the country shuts down, security is rolled out, and you have cases where citizens are disenfranchised, and all of those kind of shenanigans that happen. It shouldn't be. An election is a time for the citizens to, like I tell people, during the election, it's like the candidates are actually applying for a job from the citizens. And the citizens constitute themselves into the interview panel, and they decide on who they will give the job to or not. And for a democracy to thrive, citizens must be allowed to vote, and when they vote, their votes must count. It is when political leaders know that the citizens are the ones that hold their fate in their hands, whether they will hire them or fire them, that they deliver for the citizenry. And in Nigeria, we are not seeing that. And it's a definite area that we need to check. And in fact, you will discover that even the political parties themselves are hardly practicing internal democracy. If you look at the major parties that are here in Nigeria today, their own elections, like primaries, as we are hearing in Ondo State over the weekend, are fraught with all sorts of issues. And you ask the question, if these political parties cannot even conduct elections within their parties, how are they now going to be able to conduct elections at the national level if we vote them into power?
Nick, you just said something there, and I realized that when you made allusions to that experience, it happens that Dr. Mike Omereye is the only one with the experience, or that has had the experience of being in a ruling party and is now in opposition. So I will come back to him later and pick on that experience on a key issue that you've raised. But now I'd like for us to get back to Dr. Umera there in the US. Let's look at opposition politics as an integral part of democracy, and the democratic ideal of tolerance of opposing views, like you alluded to earlier, by the dominant or ruling party. The fact is that both government and the opposition, from what this panel has deduced or has said so far, should ordinarily complement each other to achieve, a credible democratic culture in society. But isn't it a drawback when government perceives these interventions by opposition as, or when these interventions rather are confrontational and also aggressive, and now, sorry, maybe I'm confusing you there, but I'm saying when the government in power perceives these interventions as being confrontational and also aggressive, and uses that as a means to subtly or openly also attack opposition.
So let me start by introducing a concept of loyal opposition. So opposition is said to be loyal to the same fundamental principles and or interest of the party in power, right? And that interest is the interest of in the case of our dear country, Nigeria, is the interest of the Nigerian populace. So the loyal opposition dictates that, that opposition must be legitimate, opposition must be constructive, and opposition must be responsible. In the case of the party in power has to also understand and realize that these things that are just enumerated are all designed. Opposition is designed to make governance better. In the case of our current president, for instance, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, he, from what I know, the last time I checked, is the first president of the country that had been a senator. So I suspect that he understands what opposition is, given that he himself has been in opposition pretty much all his political life. From when he was the governor of Lagos State, he was in a minority party, thereby in opposition.
Now I stand to be corrected, because earlier on I thought it was just it goes, the same goes, what goes for PDP also goes for APC. Because APC also transited from opposition into ruling party, just like PDP transited from ruling party, dominant party, into opposition. Please continue there, Dr. Nemeka, and thank you for pointing that out for us.
Yes, correct. So now the thing to me about opposition and the ideology, I will draw an example from America. I've been in this country forever. The analogy I would draw is that in America, for instance, you know what parties and what their ideologies are. You know, for instance, that the Republican Party is a right-wing party. You know, it's physically conservative, practices less government intrusion, such and so on and so forth. On the left is the Democratic Party. You know that they're left, more liberal, and so on and so forth. So when somebody says that they are Republican, you know exactly what their political ideologies are.
Yes, to the
Unfortunately, in our dear country, Nigeria, I really cannot, if you ask me right now, I really cannot tell you what the political ideology of any of these political parties are. So you find out that most of the opposition that is practiced in Nigeria are more of confrontational opposition. And so when the opposer, so to speak, starts giving criticisms, you wonder whether they're really giving the criticism because they want to see an improvement, or are they doing it based on their self-interest? Unfortunately, political parties in Nigeria and politicians in Nigeria, they see political parties as a means to get power and not necessarily based on their ideologies. So that being said, I think that the current party that is in power right now, the APC, have to be tolerant and have to listen to opposition as long as it is constructive opposition and draw from it for the betterment of the country.
Dr. Mary, I mean, I've heard people say, and just like we've heard Dr. Nemeka Umera talk about the nature of opposition in other climes and the issue of ideology. I've heard people say that the nature of our democracy, you know, of course, people in certain quarters say the nature of our democracy is one that doesn't essentially, you know, put the average ordinary citizens first and uppermost. It throws up this whole issue of the nature of our democracy, and in reality, the culture and practice of democratic ideas. You know, would you debunk the argument that says part of the challenge with quality opposition politics in Nigeria, you know, especially in this our political environment, derives from, you know, that core issue that politics here is lacking in ideology, like Dr. Nemeka just said there. Thus, you know, creating this, you know, this absence of strong foundational ideas and belief on key issues at party level. You know, this mixed grill of identical ideas that you see amongst all the political parties means that, some would say it means that every party in Nigeria, all the political parties in Nigeria are one and the same. So that a credible opposition is unlikely to thrive in such an atmosphere.
Namdi, what balance is this in a society that wants to develop democracy? Is when you have a credible development plan that binds everybody together. Now, the issue of ideology is just in methods of how you want to arrive at the same thing. Okay? Basically, it's a social contract for those in government, and then social conflict for those out of government, those in opposition. Because, for one, somebody can argue, like Nick argued, out of conflict, something good comes. Because if two people are fighting, two opposing powers are fighting, it may force the one in government, okay, to do what is right. But for social, social contract, it is a subsumed authority. You're doing something for the people. It is expected that you will deliver. But now that brings that brings us to the issue of ideology.
Yes.
But where there is absence of ideology, the country's Marshall Plan balances that out. But we don't have it. We used to have this rolling plan over time. We don't have it. And talking about loyalty, loyal opposition. Is it loyalty to government or loyalty to country? Loyalty to party in power or loyalty to governance and democracy and institutions? We need to ask that question, and how are these things playing out? You see, we have had opposition, yes, like you said rightly, the present government in power was in opposition at a point. It condemned all the policies that the government of President Jonathan churned out for the good of this country. For instance, the fuel subsidy issue, when Naira and everything was stable, they went on the streets and protested all over the place. And in fact, so many other social policies that were introduced were criticized by the same government. Today, you have them in power doing the same thing. So what did they do? How do you, now, by that act alone, you have defaced the concept of opposition politics and democracy. And in doing so, you are even going a step further. That if people criticize government, you just use the institutions of government to hunt them. And so you weaken the institutions of democracy that should defend democracy and stand to ensure that government delivers on the promises it's made. We don't have it. So you create deficits of trust for yourselves even before you come into government, because all the things that you do are, a reverse of the things you condemned so you can have access to power. That is why you find a polity that is disinterested in what government is doing. That is why sometimes when it comes to election, people don't even come out to vote. Because they just see the faces of the same people who protested yesterday doing the same thing, or even worse today. And so if we want a democracy, once we enter government, we have done enough of those aspects, those kind of dirty appreciation of opposition. Let us begin to build democracy by allowing the institutions of state to discharge their functions as they should, as it were, and apart from that, we should also, within the tenets of opposition, look at the policies of government that favor society, talk about them. Everybody goes about, as a critic, everybody is a critic. We are sitting here criticizing on armchair. Are we looking at forming ourselves into clubs, into groups to lobby to ensure that certain basics that will transform society, uplift life in society are enunciated or are taken into consideration at the legislature and therefore implemented by the executive? We are not doing so. So we find even at the legislative arm, for instance, we just heard that there is a northern senatorial caucus, there is a southern senatorial caucus, and all manner of caucuses emerging. How do you now play the opposition when you are now reducing the concept of opposition to regionalism, to tribe, to all sorts of things? It will not work. Let the parties remain as their caucuses. Let us begin to see them implementing their programs. But the moment you allow regional caucuses to flourish, then the concept of opposition is dead. Completely not, you don't expect it. And you can see it even playing out right now in the National Assembly. That is why we had controversy over budget. Somebody said the president didn't bring any budget. Oh, he brought papers. Oh, I did it. And all manner of padding allegations and all that. And then some people will go and form a group to challenge this one. Look, we need to build a country. We have work to do. If we are not ready to do it, let's just return to another form of government. There are so many forms of government that can help our people out of this misery that we are in today.
So many forms of government, like which one? Epistocracy.
Well, that is theocracy is there. Kakistocracy is what we are seeing. There are so many others. Just check.
Let's talk about epistocracy, and then when you reference mobilizing for opposition, and then the issue of regional caucuses and ethnicity in politics and in opposition, it throws up this whole issue of elitism, political elitism in Nigeria. Nick, I'd like for us to double down on that, on this whole politics of elitism, and reference the need for expanding the political space for increased public participation and inclusion, of course. So, if development outcomes are indeed the basis for the political relationship between the elites and the citizens, why then are we inundated with this outcry, public outcry of exclusive politics, of the elites, as it's been described? Are we doing enough, in terms of institutional changes now, in expanding that space for intervention of fresh ideas that emphasizes or could emphasize citizens' welfare, and possibly a bottom-top approach in governance processes?
Thank you very much for that question. I don't think we're doing enough to build institutions in Nigeria. It's one of the biggest problems in Nigeria. Nigeria and our democracy have strong individuals and weak institutions. And until we build institutions, our democracy wouldn't have started yet. Some people will say it's a chicken and egg thing. Is it institutions before leaders or leaders before institutions? But my point is very straightforward on that. It has to be leaders before institutions. It's leaders that build institutions. And it's not only leaders, because leaders will not want to build institutions that police them. So the citizenry, whom I call the fourth arm of government, they have a big role. We have a big role to, force the hands of our leaders to build these institutions. We see in the democracy we copied in the United States, we see institutions working out. Like the current president, is under investigation. The immediate past president is in court, in various courts. The sitting president's son is in court. And these are institutions taking them through the legal process, regardless of who they are or their parents are. The same thing plays out in the UK, where Boris Johnson, as a sitting prime minister, he had a knock on his door from the Metropolitan Police, and they opened 10 Downing Street. They went in there, they confiscated documents, investigated him, and they actually convicted him because he paid the fine. And that became an issue for his political career that led to his eventual removal from power. And I tell people that the extent of the impossibility of the Inspector General of Police going to Aso Villa to knock on the door of Mr. President and then go into Aso Villa, confiscate documents, investigate the president and possibly charge him to court, the extent of the impossibility of that happening is the extent of the impossibility of our democracy thriving. So it's just the case. So democracy thrives on certain pillars. And if those pillars are not there, then we're not practicing democracy at all. So like you mentioned about the election, we'll go back to the election, you discover that election is where the citizens actually have powers over the leaders. And not just for elections, after electing the leaders, the citizens are expected to accompany the leaders throughout the 4-year tenure. And they do that through advocacy, through their National Assembly members or State Assembly members. They do that, there was a case like, in fact, this Boris Johnson case I mentioned in the UK. You discover that members of parliament received millions of emails and phone calls and letters from their constituents who were angry that a sitting prime minister who locked down the country was busy doing parties. For the fact that he was doing parties during lockdown, that was the issue with Boris Johnson. And in Nigeria, we discovered that the legislature, both at the state and at the national, act as if they are a department in the government houses or in Aso Villa.
Building our institutions, I mean, that is key.
Building institutions, let the institution overpower the individuals. As we saw in the case of Donald Trump, when he lost elections, he was trying to get himself into power, and the institutions put him down. So the institution actually kicked him out of office. And we need to have that in Nigeria if our democracy is to thrive.
Dr. Mera, I mean, I could give the opposition parties here in Nigeria, some credit for stimulating public debates and generating conversation on some, key national issues. I mean, you can't write that off. We've seen some of what the major political parties have done, especially in recent times. But I think I need your thoughts on an area I think the political parties may not be doing so much or have not done so much, and or may not have invested hugely in. I'm sure you saw what played out in Senegal in the last presidential election, and now the opposition incentivized politics And for the youths especially to develop interest. Can't we, why are we not seeing, political parties or opposition political parties investing towards that direction here in Nigeria? Because of course, if we say the youth are the future of the next generation.
Absolutely. I think for any society to thrive, that society must heavily invest in their youth.
And you also saw what the youth brought into opposition politics, the innovation, the strength of opposition politics, and what it amounted or culminated to at the end of the day, with a change in governance.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'll go back a little bit to what the previous guest just articulated. I think that these societies that he's mentioning, the United States, for instance, and UK, let's not forget that the United States has been in this game for over 200 years. And so we have to be a little patient with the Nigerian system. It will work. We've just been in this since 1998. I'm not giving excuses, but with time, things will evolve and the institutions will be in place. So far, I'll actually give Nigeria kudos for the fact that, for instance, the president, President Goodluck Jonathan, was removed from office after his one full term of service. So it shows that democracy is working in Nigeria, and so the institution is going to take time for it to mature. By the time we get to 200 years, of course, none of us will be here at that time. But if we give the system time and the way it is currently done, things will continue to evolve. Okay, now in terms of youth empowerment, it is the same thing. Eventually, things will happen and youth will become more and more involved. Going back to the reference to, say, a country like America, look at who the current
I
president
actually use
is.
Senegal as my reference point there.
Oh, okay, yes, Senegal. So things will happen. Something will happen, and the grants will give. The political forces will get into place. But I don't think it's really that much of a good idea to start pushing that. Okay, youth must be in power, and the old, experience also counts. So as the forces keep evolving, there has to be a time when there will be a seismic shift. But that seismic shift doesn't happen overnight.
Great, I hear you. Dr. Michael Mary, there is absolutely no way we'll discuss this whole issue of quality of opposition politics in Nigeria and ignore the propensity for infighting and divisions within opposition parties. I'm sorry, but I'll take your party, the PDP, for instance. I mean, I'm not saying intra-party crisis is exclusive to your party, but I just wonder how the opposition can amount to credible alternative, without internal unity, or rather without unity. Because if you ask me, how can a house divided stand? Anyways.
I will take my intervention from this perspective. First, talking about the growth of democracy in Africa and the fact that ours is just starting, we are less than 30 years and so forth. America was a confused state. But it sat down, I said, look, let's draw a line and build the country. And they accepted to do it, and they are building their country. There is no hard and fast rule. We must not reinvent the wheel. We can sit down and agree we want to build our country, and let's take it. You go this way, build the country from this perspective, and we build from the other perspective. Now, sadly, Nigeria is even making reference to America, and this is when democracy has always existed here, not on a big scale, but in our communities. Now, if we must make examples, and I like local examples. Let's begin from Liberia. Okay. George Weah had 12 years. He did 6 years. The voters took him out and brought an even older person. The institutions defended it. He's there. If you go to Senegal, there was nothing the president didn't do to retain power. The institutions defended it. Can we say that to be true of the institutions we have in Nigeria? Jonathan left because he, as president of Nigeria, was trying to build strong institutions and had to be the example for that. If not, we know Nigeria, if Jonathan wanted, He would have deployed the army, he would have used the courts, he would have used all manner of means to remain in power. But he didn't do it. Did we get this kind of reciprocity? Did Nigerian people get this kind of reciprocity subsequently? No. Now what we have, talking about opposition politics and democracy, is the entire population is on one side, only the privileged few who are either inside government or the relations of those in power or the cronies of those in power that are on the other side, that they are the ones that are enjoying the privileges of social contract. We have a country to build. We should not lie to ourselves. We should not defend the truth, the lies. We should not. We should tell government the truth. That is opposition. And the government must tolerate it if it wants to deliver for itself. Okay, but if the government takes offense...
Dr. Mary, I'm sorry
now I'll come to...
Yes,
no,
okay,
I'm
please,
coming to PDP. It's a
yes.
holistic thing. We cannot do this in isolation because it is what is happening out there in the other party and in governance that is affecting the PDP that you mentioned. And if you go to the
but
PDP...
I did say it's not exclusive to the PDP.
Yes, so
I'm
talking inclusively. I'm making reference to everything that is happening generally. Yes. And I'm going to learn. Now, if you come to the PDP, you will find that apart from the fact that we internally, in fact, all the major characters in that party played anti-party politics. We know it. We participated in the elections that passed. We knew who played. They were cherry picking. Some of them will be anti-party in this state, will be for themselves in another state. We have seen it all over the place. And today, they have become victims of what they instituted and created a major distraction to the party in terms of the kind of role it should play in contributing to governance and government. Because instead of now facing the government to tell it the truth to its face, we are facing ourselves to try to tell ourselves the truth in difficulty. If you talk about Wike, if you talk about Atiku, all of them were, and they chose to do what they thought would favor them. So we can name names and places because we were participants.
Invariably, there's no way opposition politics or opposition can be effective if these fights or infightings continue. In all the parties, of course.
Because that is just to show you the nature of politics that we are playing today. And that's why I say we should deviate from politics for power and move to politics for development. We need to grow this country. We need to grow the economy. We need to have people participating in their various corners and zones. But what we have today are people just struggling for power. And they get the power, they don't have the ideas, they don't even know what to do with it. That is what we have.
You know, Nick, I wonder what your take is on this issue. I mean, this same issue of, the assertion that the seeming weakness of opposition parties in Nigeria arises partly as a result of this prolonged internal crisis within the parties. Historically, it will seem like, like Dr. Mary has just said, that, this self-inflicted crisis often leads us to the precipice of a one-party state. How much so does the lack of internal democracy within parties impact the quality of opposition politics in Nigeria, in your own opinion?
Thank you very much for that question. Before I answer it, I'd just like to make a contribution to Dr. Mera's take on my take. And that is like, I will soon be 60 years old. I'm not too far from 60 years.
Really?
Yes, and I have grown.
You're really good if you're almost 60. I mean, I would take you for maybe like a 35-year-old.
Birthday last month. So that it then means that I have grown up in a Nigeria, post-independent Nigeria, and I can see, based on my own lived experience, that the Nigeria I was growing up in the 60s and 70s was a better Nigeria than the Nigeria of today. So for me, if we're making progress, then I would say, fine, we're going to get there. And I think we need to make progress.
In fact, I think we've gone beyond the 40 minutes mark. And so at this point, we'll begin to round off our conversation. And so in rounding up this conversation, I'll just, maybe let me cross over to Dr. Nnaemeka Umera there and get your final words on what you think. I know you've heard analysts like yourself say things about, what should be done going forward in terms of opposition politics. But in your own, coming from you, what are your expectations going forward in terms of, what you expect from opposition parties between now and maybe the next elections? Maybe I know you've heard things like a fractured opposition means a fractured democracy. So in terms of quality, what do you expect from the opposition going forward?
So going forward, of course, in our country, Nigeria, I expect still the same type of opposition we're seeing now, which is really not ideologically based opposition. I hope and I pray that these other parties,
but do you then expect, perhaps, do you then expect issues-based, opposition politics? If we do not have foundational ideological footings going forward, what then do you expect? How then do you expect them to go about these issues?
So yes, I expect for us to have structured and civil discussions about the issues facing the country, which are many. There are so many issues, security and the economy, which is getting better now, healthcare, education, those kinds of things. I hope that when the opposition, after they put their houses in order together, will tend to be more inclined to discuss issues affecting the common man.
Great, thank you. Dr. Mary, I apologize in advance for bringing this up, but I'm sure you remember once upon a time when the PDP boasted it would rule Nigeria for 60 years uninterrupted, and then, of course, 2015 happened. Would you say there's a lesson there for any ruling party in Nigeria, and that incumbency isn't necessarily the bedrock for deflecting opposition and winning not just elections, but winning over the hearts and love of the people? There are lessons
for Nigeria, and there are lessons for those who were then in opposition. And these lessons are simple. You do not fall into the lure of people who just want to take power for power's sake. Now, let me tell you, Nigeria is a country that is desirous, especially in the youthful population, of moving forward. Yes. Don't forget, many of us chose to stay back because we saw a Nigeria that was growing to become the best, better than the examples we are giving. Many people went abroad and came back. Today, people who didn't even know how to go to abroad are struggling through any means to go abroad and stay there so they think it's better. But if you know what is there, it's not the same thing. The only thing is that governments there try to ease things for the people. So people there complain too, they are also complaining, but they have ways of doing things. But you don't have problem of light, your children go to school easy, the transport system provides for your children, for visitors, for students, and so forth and so on. Do we have it here? Of course, we have acknowledged where Tinubu does, the government of President Tinubu does well, we acknowledge, we commend him. I have said that severally on TV. But where they do wrong, we should say it. And where they know that they are doing wrong, they should accept it and correct it.
Nick, I mean, you are summing up the entire discourse for us, and in fact, you're signing off our conversation on this issue. Do give us your submission on your expectation on the quality of opposition politics going forward, and put that against the backdrop of Nigerian politics and the blame game.
It's very difficult for Nigerian opposition to thrive because sometimes you don't even know when someone is in opposition or not. Nigeria needs to consider maybe a change in our democracy from the presidential to the parliamentary. Like what we have in the UK, the opposition is actually an official arm of government. The opposition government is recognized, is paid by the government, and you have a shadow cabinet. And maybe that is the kind of thing we should consider so that people will now remain in opposition knowing that they are still in government without having to jump ship.
I'd like to appreciate you all for your vibrant contributions to this discourse. It has indeed been a robust conversation. Dr. Mike Omeri, PDP chieftain and former Director General, National Orientation Agency, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Nick Agule, public affairs commentator and public policy analyst. Nick, by the way, is an ordained deacon of the church. Anglican or Catholic church? Anglican church, it should be. Catholic church. So he's actually a reverend. He's Reverend Nick. Rev, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you very much.
I'd also like to appreciate our guest from the United States, Dr. Nnemeka Umera, public policy advocacy and research expert. Dr. Umera is a certified medical doctor, amongst other things, I should say. Good things, I tell you. Doc, thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, gentlemen, for a very beautiful conversation. I learned so much from you guys today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's kind of you. Thank you too.
And that's it. Elizabeth Omori is up next.
Digital literacy involves the ability to find, evaluate, and communicate information using digital media platforms. In 2020, the federal government of Nigeria launched the Digital Nigeria program to empower innovators and entrepreneurs with skills required to thrive in our emerging digital economy. This, ICT and financial experts say, could provide immediate empowerment for Nigerians, help develop skills and remove bottlenecks in certain sectors, if not all. Are we taking full advantage of this process to reduce unemployment? Why is this so important to socioeconomic development? My guest, Dr. Rislan Kaya, Deputy Vice Chancellor, ICT Research and Innovation, Bayes University, will speak to us. Thank you so much, Dr. Rislan, for joining us on Insights.
Thank you very much.
Are we taking advantage of this process?
It's about digital competence, and by extension, you're talking about digital inclusion, or maybe you can say digital citizenship. And you'd mentioned digital economy. So these are words that I think can guide our discussion. So if you look at our literacy level globally and nationally, we still have about 31% of our population still illiterate. So which will also have a lot of issues around digital literacy. Then with the recent things happening around learning poverty, school deprivation, and learning deprivation, that also maybe lead us to another discussion around digital literacy. So if you look at the data available from the global space, 52 or 53% of youngsters are not getting the minimum proficiency level in reading and learning, which is a big issue that can hamper digital literacy. So if you look at our region, Sub-Saharan Africa, I think about 86% of our youngsters, when I mean youngsters, children that are going to school, are still not learning the minimum proficiency level in mathematics and English. So if you look at Nigeria, I think about over 90% of our youngsters are still struggling to get the minimum proficiency. If you look at many states, I always use myself where I came from, where learning poverty is as high as I think 99%. And if you look at the same time, out of school children is a big point. And recently, the federal government, through Ministry of Education, launched an initiative called DOTS, looking at the possibility of getting data about who is learning, who is not learning, who is not in the school. Then talking about the skills. With digital literacy is the foundational skills. Then you talk about teacher skills, then you talk about the global competitiveness as a nation. So digital literacy, in Nigeria, we're not really doing bad. If you look at the indicators also from the Nigerian Communication Commission website, over 280 telephone lines, bigger than our population. If you look at the internet users in Nigeria, you look at the social network users. So we're not really doing bad in terms of ability to navigate to the global space, as well as using the 21st century tools and skills. Practically everyone I know have access to this digital technology. If they're not on WhatsApp, they're not on Facebook, they have access to digital technology. So this is one thing that I think is really, really good. And now, just 1 year ago, we had something about ChatGPT, generative AI, and other AI tools. That also complicated this issue of digital literacy, because people need to be digital citizens. Beyond just the usual citizen, you need to be a digital citizen. And beyond that, you need to be part of the digital economy, not the traditional economy. If you look at global indicators as well, we are not really doing bad in terms of that. But where we have issue is our ability to, in your earlier discussion, you say ability to find and evaluate. We have to go beyond finding and evaluation. Yeah, with the emerging technologies now, you can easily find, you can easily evaluate what is good, what is bad. But now is our ability to critically use this information resource. Digital literacy, digital competence, and even digital empowerment is something that is continuous, it's not just a program, and I'm happy with what federal government is doing.
And that's it on this episode of the program. Do join us same time next week for more on Insight. My name is Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.